This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. It's nearly 3 years, well it's over 3 years I think, since the Boss GT1000 core was released. Now at the time I have to say I was a little bit of a dick about this because some of the press release stuff and some of the comparisons were made like with the HX Stomp, and it talked about, you know, there being 24 simultaneous blocks that you could use in the GT1000 core, which is like 3 times as many as you could have in the HX Stomp. And what I had kind of said about that at the time was, yes, but what they haven't told you there, what they're not pointing out in these other, you know, paid demos and stuff, is that basically quite a lot of them it's like a semi-fixed signal chain where there's a couple of EQs, a couple of noise suppressors, and yeah, I think about 6 of those blocks are like utility stuff. And then in terms of like the delays and reverbs, there's actually like 1 reverb block and 1 serious delay block, and then like there's like 4 simple delays and that sort of stuff. But once you get that out of the way, since the launch I've not really heard people talk about the GT1000 core too much, and I do think this is probably the most powerful thing of its size. So this is, you know, HX Stomp sized, obviously, but can run dual amps and can legitimately run like 2 drives alongside those dual amps, a bunch of other effects, a reverb, a delay, a bunch of simple delays. I think you could probably run more in this unit than a headrush unit or that sort of stuff. It's not necessarily as powerful as like a full Helix, but in this form factor, I can't think of anything that can run dual amps as well as loads of effects. So like the Hotone Ampero Stomp can run 2 amps and like 4 other effects because of the way the routing works. So that's one thing. Another thing is that because of this semi-fixed signal path, and one thing that we've been hearing quite a bit about in the modeling world at the moment is this seamless preset switching stuff. Now, the Tone Master Pro is one of the things that has this, and it's been, you know, a fairly big deal about that, you know, that you could go into any preset and switch to any other preset, and you don't have like a glitch or a pop or anything like that. It just kind of switches between presets and essentially gets rid of the need for things like scenes and snapshots to some extent. And Fractal have just got rid of the gap essentially in the axe effects, you know, so that's got more or less seamless switching now as well. Helix, you've been able to do this for a long time, but you could just basically limit to one DSP processor and then have fully seamless switches between presets. But the GT1000 stuff has been able to do this the whole time, partly because the signal chain is like slightly limited. You know, I think it's plenty for most people, and it's only when you compare it to something like a full Helix or like a quad cortex or something like that where you think, right, well, I can't do quite as much as I could on those units. But compared to any of the other small units, the GT1000 core does stack up incredibly well. It's got 32-bit processing, whereas almost every other modeler is 24. So why don't we talk about it more? I think there's a few reasons which I'll try and go into here, but I think like Boss, to some extent, in the modeling game hasn't managed to get the sex appeal thing going. I think part of the reason is that they don't tend to update these units. I'll talk more about that later, but that is a huge driver, I think, in why people are interested in Fractal units and in Line 6 and Neural DSP stuff, because they're, you know, following that Fractal model of having free updates, which does give people like me a reason to talk to you about these things, because it's relevant again. Whereas, you know, since 2020, have you heard much about the GT1000 core, apart from dickheads like me, you know, saying that they've not really told you everything about it that you might want to know if you're coming over from the Helix world? Possibly not, or you might have seen some people trying them out and kind of not getting on with them. I think also the display feels a little bit not necessarily 2020, but the editor is really good, and there's some other aspects that I think aren't so great about it. But the effects in here as well, the Boss effects, obviously we know have been, you know, tried and tested. This has some aspects of the 500 series effects from Boss, which I think are pretty popular. It's able to load 16 IRs. The speaker cab part of this, I'll show you a bit later on, is I think a bit of a weak point as well. But in terms of hardware, super solidly built and feels very premium. I think it's one of the lowest latency units out there as well. Oh, that's one other thing. The power supply is a bit of a, you know, it's not ideal, is it? But yeah, the GT1000 core, you can switch between dual amp presets with loads of effects and without a gap. And that's not something that most other units can do. I think Headrush can do it to some extent as well. But a really impressive unit still 3 years later, and there's not been anything, I think, smaller than this or this size that has knocked it out of this spot. I think it's the most powerful thing for its size still. So it's a bit of a shame, really. I feel like that there are some aspects that maybe could have been improved, that would have got more people to know about this thing. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are you using one? I could totally gig this thing and be fine with it, I think. So I have actually built some presets for this that are up on the Boss Tone Exchange. So that's the reason that they sent me a GT1000 core in the first place, and I was paid to build some presets for it. Since then, I've not done a whole lot with it, but the talk of the Tone Master Pro made me kind of and you know, people reminded me in the comments like the Boss stuff can do this seamless switching anyway. But so, I mean, I don't think there's too much sex factor with this, although Boss hardware, I do feel like they make it really, really solid. It is doing the seamless thing. Two areas that I feel like Boss kind of shoots itself in the foot, or themselves in the foot with this stuff, is that they've not really updated the GT1000 or the GT1000 core since they were released, and that has meant that there's, you know, less things for people like me to talk about. Never mind the fact that, you know, that what's in there probably is plenty, but what keeps us interested in fractal devices, in the Line 6 devices, in the Quad Cortex even, and even some of the cheaper devices like the Hotone Ampero, updates to the software included, you know, the amp models, stuff like that, is basically one of the things that gives us a reason to talk about them and to get them back off the shelf and think about other things in them. Another area where I feel like there's a bit of a different way of doing things in the Boss world, which Line 6 and Fractal do a little bit of this, where it's like amps that aren't necessarily based on anything in the real world. But the amps in here are mostly if you look at this list, oh, maybe Supreme might be you know, we've got to JC120 before we have a name that we recognise from the real world. And I do think that could be a bit of a, you know, when I'm on other modelers, I'm generally looking for something familiar to kind of get my foot in the door, if that makes sense. JC120 Twin. Quite a nice one. Deluxe, okay, another familiar thing. So now we're in business, like these are things that we know of. The Diamond, I think, is Brit Stat. Rec to stack, right? matchless. Boogie combo. Orange stack. Bogner Überschau. And then I think a couple of bass amps. X Drive bass. Concert? Don't know if that's a bass amp. Okay, this signal chain is somewhat fixed, so you can move things around, but basically what you've got in here is what you get. So you get like one multi-delay block, 4 other delay blocks, an EQ, a couple of effects where you can put in different things, another EQ, a noise suppressor, a second amp, a drive, noise suppressor, another amp, chorus, DS1, effects, EQ, compressor. So like these are the blocks that you can have and kind of are there, kind of already populated. Of course you can change what happens within them, but that is the reason essentially that you have the ability to then switch things pretty seamlessly. So let's where's the other amp? Here. Type. But so you can go from having also we got, of course, the Boss effects we know are very decent, right? And we got plenty of drive types. One other area that I'm not hugely enthused about is if we go into basically speaker simulator section is over here. I think you can run an IR. I can't remember how you do it. Yeah, you load them in these bits. We've got some options and some mic blends and stuff. But it's kind of a bit, that part of the interface, I think, sort of, I don't know, to me, falls apart slightly because it's a bit unclear exactly what is going on, for me at least. But I think in general you could go between dual amp presets with seamless switching. Like, this can do pretty much as almost, well, most of the modelers on the market, and yet we don't really talk about it that much. So let me know in the comments if you've got some thoughts on why. But I think a very capable unit, and in some ways I think it's a bit sad that they've not got the love that maybe, I think this hardware certainly and the capability of it is there, but maybe it's a little bit underutilized, both in terms of Boss updating it, but also in terms of getting it in front of guitarists who could appreciate what is in there. And I think maybe the amp modeling part of it is another aspect which is sort of holding people back in that regard. You know, if it was more stuff that you were totally familiar with, okay, I know what that does and I know what that sounds like, then maybe you trust it a little bit more. Versus, as it is, I think some people have a bit of a question mark about whether the drive sounds within Boss GT units are up to snuff. Thank you for stopping by. Yeah, jump into the Boss Tone Exchange if you want to try my presets for GT1000 Core. I think I'll try and put together some more, probably.